Lines.
Okay, let's pull her back together, brothers. So despite having a nursing background rather than a mathematical background, I love statistics. So in preparing for this talk, I just went on Google and I Googled, how do introverts make friends? Because I'm an introvert, I am, believe it or not. And so I Googled, how do introverts make friends? And the answer came up, 10% do not make friends. The other 90% are discovered by an extrovert, adopted, and taken care of by him. So, who is your extrovert if you are an introvert? I certainly have mine. As we began the first talk, we're going to begin the second talk with a scriptural reflection. And this is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, verses 46 to 50. While he was still speaking to the crowds, his mother and his brothers appeared outside, wishing to speak with him. Someone told him, "Your mother and your brothers are standing outside asking to speak to you." But he said in reply to the one who told him, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brother. For whoever does the will of my heavenly Father is my brother and sister and mother." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
When I am doing baptisms in my parish and my previous parish and so forth, I usually, for the Gospel, I default to that Gospel passage where Jesus takes a child in his arms and he says, "Unless you become like a child, you will never enter the kingdom of God." And I say to the parents, because we're all old, right? So there's no way we're going backwards. We're not going to get younger. So we need to become children in a different way. We need to become children more like the child that we are baptizing right now. And what makes them special is they are completely dependent on their parents for everything. They're honest, they are open to exploring the world and finding out things about themselves and the world, and hopefully one day about God. And all of this takes a certain vulnerability. Children are vulnerable, as we all know. When even in our families, to be a brother or a father or a friend or a fraternal connection of some kind, all of those require vulnerability on your part. There is absolutely nothing special about Patrick and I that made us perfect people for the story that we related in the first talk. There is nothing special about us. I'm an introvert, he's an introvert, I think. Yeah, he's on the line, but I'm definitely an introvert. And I rely on the energy of others to keep my energy going. So there's nothing particularly special about us except that we are willing to be vulnerable with others. And vulnerability is a big part of fraternity. I really think the two keys to fraternity are intentionality, which we talked about in the first talk, and the second one is to be vulnerable with others. I think it's really important for us to remember that love is both the cure of suffering, but it is also the cause of suffering. And as we were going over our story, and as we were relating it today, and it's our story, but you see well, I see the suffering that we went through, the divisions and all of the work that we were making to try and build bridges to get past those divisions and all of the other sufferings that we went through. I mean, spiritually anyway, I'm some days fat and lazy. Like, I would rather sit around and, do nothing most of the days. And so, there is a suffering even in going out there sometimes. But love is both the cure and the cause of suffering. And we had started in the first talk defining what fraternity is, and a lot of the definition comes from our synod on fraternity that we had at St. Augustine's. But in that talk that Archbishop Benazzi gave us that time, he mentioned the 7 parts of the art of building communion, but he also said that any kind of love requires a person to be vulnerable with another. This vulnerability is created and nurtured in an environment wherein we feel accepted, safe, and feel free to feel whatever we are feeling and express whatever we desire to express. Without this vulnerability, bridges cannot be built between people or groups. No one will feel comfortable expressing opinions, and progress in projects will be reduced. So, another great suffering that we went through was what Patrick and I would later go on to call the ministry to the lost. We had a code name for it, so when we were around other people, we would just say, we need to talk about Montreal. Only because they both started with that. We had this ministry to the lost, and I was actually the founder, to be honest, because my first client was Patrick. And it was a secret society. I mean, there were tens of seminarians and even a few faculty, I think, that were helped out by the ministry to the lost, and they didn't even know it. It was just us being us. We were open and vulnerable to others, and we'd reach out and establish a connection with them. We had a few referrals. Patrick would come to my room and say, you really should go talk to so-and-so. And I'd be like, oh, God. Okay, sure. Give me the hard ones. I had all the hard ones in the beginning. He took the easy ones. But that was our ministry. We called it Ministry to the Lost. And as we approached the end of our formation, and we were both going to leave, we were the only two in the ministry, but we needed it to continue. So we passed it on we passed the responsibility on to 1 or 2 others, and they're doing their best to keep it going in our absence.
And with that, I'd say, we talked earlier about how we have our group dynamic, but every person needs a best friend too, someone they can really be open and honest and vulnerable with. And so we used to look around and be like, who's that guy talking to? And we try and help him find that person. I remember having chats with guys, trying to see how they were doing and that sort of thing. And I'd say, who do you talk to when you're feeling this way? And often you discover they don't talk to anybody. And it's like, I find, you need someone to talk to about these things, and that could be me if you want, but maybe there's somebody else that you want. I remember one of the younger guys, we even basically said, can't be us, you need someone in your own year who's gonna be with you till the end kind of thing. And we've seen these beautiful friendships develop where you got guys who are developing that kind of a fraternal bond with each other. Fraternity requires vulnerability, as Walter said, and as Archbishop Benazzi said. But we have to recognize that this vulnerability is a two-edged sword. And what I mean by that is it's maybe very easy for you to look at Walter and I and think, oh, well, they got it together and they're going to go and help everybody and that sort of thing. And we might see fraternity as my job is to help the guy that needs help. And that's very one-sided. To really understand and appreciate fraternity well, requires us to have enough humility to recognize that we need the fraternity as much as the other person. It's not just, oh, Walter and Patrick are going to go help the world. No, we recognize very much our own need for a fraternal bond, for a fraternal charity. We are very present to each other. Our classmates, for the most part, are very present to us as well. And because we have those bonds ourselves, we're able then to share that and extend that to others as well. Like, we're living what we're talking about, and it requires us to be vulnerable. And it involves suffering. Sometimes it's the suffering we suffer ourselves, that we have to go into that our own vulnerability and suffer through that. And sometimes it's sharing with compassion in the suffering someone else is going through. I have prayed more novenas for the guys in the seminary, individuals, over my years in formation and now. I'm actually praying a novena right now for one of the guys. Then I've lost count, and it's like I have been suffering and carrying some of their struggles over the years with them. I've supported them in conversation and that kind of way, but I also have been praying for them as well. And so that's something I think for us to be mindful of. We can look at the example of our friend from Spiritual Year and Philosophy, who we really had to go out of our way. And it's funny, there's so many times along the way in the early years where people kind of told us, just forget about him. Like, why are you trying so hard? You're not going to be friends with everybody. Well, it was more than about being friends with him. And it was more than even just making our year group more enjoyable. We knew he needed support. We wanted to be able to give him the support he needed because we didn't want to see him burn out. We didn't want to see him leave because he didn't have the supports that he needed, which is a very different way to leave than discerning out, because it's not where God's calling you to be. We can look to our little brother example that we have, the guy we're going to his ordination this weekend. He's someone who landed on our lap, didn't know him at all. He's one of the Toronto kids. And it's interesting, early on we sensed there was something he was struggling with, and over time we built that trust, and he was able to share with us what was going on in his life, and we've journeyed with him through that. He's one of the younger brothers that we've grown in relationship with, and so us going to his ordination in particular isn't just we're friends with all the seminarians, but we are. I think we'd be happy to be at all the ordinations, but him in particular we've developed this beautiful fraternal bond with. And then our own needs, as I said, so Walter and I support each other. I look to my own rough patch in seminary, in my internship, where I really needed the fraternity of my brothers to help me through it, and their prayers. There was a point where Walter needed my prayers, and he was one of the novenas I prayed was for Walter at a particular juncture in his journey. And so we need to have that two-edged sword. One of the things that I think is important is that not everyone finds it as easy to be vulnerable. Some guys really struggle with opening up. We have another friend who is younger than us, and he really, you really gotta coax it out of him. Like, you see it's there, and you're just trying to get it out of him, and it takes an hour of chatting with him, and then finally he'll tell you what's really going on. So you really gotta work at it. And so sometimes you have to help a guy be vulnerable. And so it's so easy to be like, how you doing? And the guy says, I'm fine. You'd be like, great, see you later. But to be attentive and trying to help guys be vulnerable, to help ourselves to grow in our willingness to be vulnerable. And for a guy who finds it hard to be vulnerable, he might open up a little bit, and then what we say in response to that is going to determine whether or not he's going to continue to open up or he's going to shut down. So let me give two examples. Father Walter here just moved to a new parish. It's 5 parishes, 3 of them are closed, 2 of them are open and active. Of the 3 that are closed, 1 is scheduled to be canonically closed in a short while, and one of the other 3, the parishioners are clamoring for him to open it back up. And so he's got a lot on his plate. He's only been there 2 months. So somebody might say, hi Walter, what's going on? He might share a little bit about that, and they might respond by saying, well, I was ordained and given 4 parishes right off the start. You'll be fine, you know? And he might say, oh, great, thanks for the support, you know? Whereas you might say, wow, what's the hardest part about that for you? You know, it's to open it up and dig into that, to allow him, because sometimes the guy we're talking to hasn't even dug through his own emotions yet. Sometimes you're helping him to figure out what is the piece of that most bothers me. Another example from my own diocese, the former associate of our cathedral was just reassigned to be associate in a rural parish, and it's quite a vast rural parish where he lives in his own rectory different from the pastor. So I went over to him and I said, you're moving, how do you feel about this move? And he said, well, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And I could have said, well, you'll get over it, God willing. But I said, well, what is it that's overwhelming you? I genuinely was curious. He is a religious priest from another part of the world serving in our diocese, and he says to me, I've never lived alone. And so the thought of going to this new place that I'm not familiar with, living alone in the middle of nowhere, I'm feeling overwhelmed about making that transition. I said, wow, that's hard. That's a big shift. And so I used to see him at the cathedral, but I didn't have his phone number. I said, why don't you give me your phone number? If it's okay, I'll give you a call from time to time, just check on you, how you're doing. And I told him I'd pray for him, and I have been praying for him. And so these are just some of the ways, just even in our general conversation with guys at a priest gathering or wherever, that we can either help build those bridges of fraternity, or we can kind of throw the bomb on the bridge and we're never going to cross to the other side.
So now, when you want to bring fraternity to your own diocese or even deanery or part of the diocese or whatever, you really have to take a look at the demographics of your presbyterate. And we feel there are a couple of groups of priests who are sometimes forgotten. Number one is the retired priests. Retired priests. I've retired from nursing, but I went right into a new job. So, I don't have that experience of my work life is over and, now what do I do kind of thing, right? So it must be very difficult, I would imagine, at times, and very difficult to keep going and to maintain the relationships and friendships, fraternity that you had while you were an active priest. So I think in my parish in Alberton, I have 2 retired priests living in the community. So as a new pastor, it's kind of it's kind of a new challenge for me to figure out how to reach out to these 2 and to keep them in the loop, kind of thing, and give them little things to do to as much as they want. Right? They're retired; they can do whatever they want. So retired priests. The second one is our seminarians. In Prince Edward Island, I must say we're good at taking care of our seminarians, but we don't usually have a whole lot. We have 2 right now, but we don't always have a whole lot. But no matter how many seminarians you have, it's nice to have communication with them at the seminary. I have to be honest, my first couple of years of seminary, I never heard that much from my diocese. And I was, the first 2 years, I was the second seminarian, but then from first theology right up till the end, I was the only one. I was the only one in St. Augustine's. We had another guy at St. Peter's, but I was the only one in St. Augustine's. And sometimes not hearing from anyone back home was a little bit sad, to be honest. But we need to take care of our seminarians, not only when they're at the seminary though, but when they come home. They come home for a big break at Christmas and then for the summer, and we need to include them because, God willing, they will be part of our presbyterate soon. And Patrick and I can speak personally to this last group and its new pastors. I just became a pastor 2 months ago. Patrick became an administrator 2 months ago. We're both on our own now for the first time. And, there are a lot of challenges. A lot of them we expected, I'm sure, but a lot of them we didn't expect. So it would probably be nice if we, in our fraternity, remember in particular the challenges of being a new pastor, or maybe even a new associate, because if you live in a diocese where your associates can move around, ours don't in Charlottetown generally, but you know, even that change can be kind of difficult for them.
Yeah, similar to Walter, when I was in seminary, certainly for the first number of years, in an official capacity, I rarely heard from the diocese. That said, there were a number of priests who themselves would reach out regularly to check in on me. When I'd be home, they'd want to take me out for a meal. And I juxtapose that with seeing the experience of another guy in another diocese who really had this sense that it's like, I am absolutely cut out and not a part of anything until the day I'm ordained. Like somehow on that day, I magically go from a nobody to part of the presbyterate. And I remember thinking like, okay, maybe he has a point there. Like part of the discernment of the diocesan seminarian is discerning your call, not just to the priesthood, but to your particular diocese. And so I think it's important that we build those connections. Obviously the guy information is still in a certain degree in an ongoing process of discernment. The seminary and the diocese are likewise discerning with the individual. But one of the things that actually helps that discernment is including him in the life of the diocese. I was lucky later on to be able to go to the priest retreat. And I remember some priests thinking like it was stupid that I was there because I had just done my retreat at the seminary. But being able to participate in the retreat with the presbyterate was actually very helpful and fruitful. I was then invited to some of the talks that the priests were having together as we prepared for the restructuring of the Archdiocese of Halifax-Yarmouth, and like that's what I was getting ordained into. I was coming in right after that restructuring would have taken place and starting my parochial ministry in these new parishes, and so that was very helpful. And so how we build those connections, I think, is really key. We want to talk about priest support groups. Now, I don't think that's a foreign concept to anyone here. Many of you have probably been in a priest support group in one form or another, at one point or another. Recently, in the Archdiocese of Halifax, we've been talking about having priest support groups. Some of the guys have had them, some of the guys have never had them, some I think are still going on. And we've been really discussing, well, what does that look like? What does this look like for us to support one another? And that's growing out of our own experience of we're a small presbyterate, how do we support one another? We're all going through the same challenges in one way or another. And so we've had a lot of discussions about how do you form a support group? Is it by region? Is it by age? Is it pastors are together and associates are together? How do you form it? We have a bit of an English-French thing as well, so do you put language groups together? Like, how does that work? We don't currently have deaneries, so then the question was, should we have deaneries? Could the deaneries serve as the platform for this kind of priest support system as well? Honestly, we've talked about it for over a year. We haven't come to a hard and fast conclusion, and so a group of 4 of us in the city, who are pastors and 1 administrator, basically just said, we're doing it. We're just starting. So we've just had 2 meetings. It's a monthly meeting. We get together at one of our rectories, we have coffee, we have a short time of prayer, and we share about what's going on. So that hopefully will continue to be developed and cultivated, but you know, we got to figure out a way in the presbyterate, and you know, we're waiting and waiting to get a consensus among everybody of this is how it's going to look. And finally we just said, you know what, somebody's just going to start something and we'll see where it takes us. In our own personal experiences, for Walter, he's in a diocese where there is more of a younger diocesan priest base, so there's 4 guys who get together every Tuesday for dinner and some prayer and some fellowship, and so they're doing that. In my diocese, I'm the only guy under 40 who's a diocesan priest. There's 1 guy in his 40s, and I think the next diocesan priest in his 50s. So there's challenges there, and so we're starting, like I said, that priest group, but in many ways, my first 2 years of the priesthood, my key relationships of priestly fraternity did not come from within my diocese. They came from my classmates, from the seminarians. In many ways, sometimes it was even priests at the seminary checking in on me more than the priests in my diocese checking in on me. And I say that not to be critical in any way of my diocese. I think it's probably a common experience in a lot of places. And especially when you're really busy, to make time to check in on guys is another thing that you need time to do. To make that extra phone call or that visit takes time. But I think we need to consider how we can not be satisfied with the way things might be, and how we can call ourselves to find a way to improve them.
Yeah, and talk about suffering. I mean, the Tuesday night thing for me at times is very challenging because my day off is Wednesday, so Tuesday is basically my Friday, right? So by the time we get to the end of the work week, we're tired. I'm an introvert, so oftentimes by Tuesday morning, I am done of people. I don't want to see anyone. I do mass that morning at St. Anthony's at 10 o'clock. I sit in the office until 12:30, and then I go home. And ideally, I would sit around and do nothing for the rest of the day. But I got these 3 other guys who are, saying, "Come on, where are we going? Are we meeting in Charlottetown or what?" And it's a 2-hour drive for me to get to Charlottetown. So, now I go with Andrew Hanrahan. I just drive as far as Richmond, and then he drives me to Charlottetown. But it's still, it's an effort and it's suffering. But every time I get there, I say to myself, thank God I came, because I feel so refreshed. Not totally refreshed all the time, but I do feel some refreshment. And it's good to see them. I get to complain about my parishioners with people who actually know what I'm talking about. When I had a pastor, I complained about him all the time. And now I'm the pastor, so I get to complain about me. So, it's win-win-win-win-win, so, but it is a little bit of suffering. But as Benazzi says, how much are we willing to suffer for others and for one another? We have, in the process of creating fraternity in our year group, in our seminary, and now we're trying to do it in our parishes and dioceses, we have heard every single excuse against it. What are some of the common excuses of why not to do fraternity? Well, number one is the one I just said. I'm too tired and I don't have time. You know what I want to say to that, and I should say it to myself more often? You are willing to sit down in the evening and watch the Toronto Maple Trees try and play hockey, or you're willing to sit down and watch the Toronto Blue Faces try and play baseball, which takes 3 to 4 hours, which is great every now and then. But you got time for that, but you ain't got time to go have a beer with your neighboring priest or whatever. And you don't have to miss every ball game or hockey game, but I really think we need to be intentional about making more time about it. So I don't have time. I don't have energy. I don't like the people that I'm with, or my neighbors, or we have nothing in common. All of these excuses, and most of the excuses can be pulled back to you. They can come back to you. You are the cause of those excuses. You're the one not making time. You're the one not trying to build these bridges. So what is it in you that is preventing you from reaching out and trying to make these connections? Anything you want to add to that? All right. I think it's very important that you think in your own diocese, in your own area. Think about those priests that you haven't seen or heard from for a while, and those should be the first targets of your fraternity, because none of us can do this alone, right? So if you haven't seen or heard from someone for a while, they could be going into lone wolf mode, and we really don't want that, because it's not good for them and it's not good for any of us at all. Feel free to add anything as I'm going. You start.
So one of the things that we came to experience for ourselves in the seminary was the need to kind of be intentional about building fraternity, to be intentional that fraternity is important, not just at the seminary, but in the presbyterate. And you know, to use some of the language we heard on the Tuesday talks, we really had to change the culture of fraternity in the seminary. There were kind of two things that I heard on a regular basis that I thought we have to fight against that. One was from the day I arrived at the seminary, one of the lines that people, older seminarians, used to love to say, I even heard faculty members of other seminaries say this themselves, is the best view of the seminary is from the rear view mirror. And along with that, we've heard things that anyone who really likes the seminary probably isn't called to the priesthood. So let's just make seminary a miserable experience, and then you'll just be so happy to go to a parish, you'll last as a priest. This is if you follow through with what people are saying, this is ultimately what they're saying. And I remember hearing that right from the get-go, thinking, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Why should we not enjoy our time in the seminary? Yes, you should be looking forward to ordination, you should be excited to go to the parish, but it shouldn't be that you have a hate for the seminary. And I actually saw many guys who were ordained before we ever got there who were known as guys who hated the seminary, guys who would never go back to the seminary after their experience there. And I just thought, my goodness, I'm going to spend the next 6 or 7 years here. I am not going to leave feeling that way. What a terrible existence for anyone. So we really combated that. We said, no, we are not going to leave the seminary with the view that the rear view mirror is the best view. We're going to love the seminary. And it's funny, our class goes back to the seminary more than any other class has ever gone. And it's not because we're not happy in the parish or happy as priests, but we're also just very comfortable going back and seeing people and being present to the seminarians. We have good relationships with the priest faculty. You know, the reason I'm going to the ordination tonight is because the Iranian librarian who's worked there for the last 30 years called me and said, Patrick, you have to go to the ordination. And I said, Miriam, I can't. I'm starting in a new parish. It's Thanksgiving weekend. I should really be there. Patrick, it's Ryan. You have to go for Ryan. Everyone knows Ryan's our favorite. So eventually I said, okay, fine, I'll go. And then someone from the academic office, I was talking to her, and she said, well, I didn't want to pressure you, but I wondered, how would you have felt on Thursday night if Walter got on a plane from Moncton and went to Toronto, and you drove back to Halifax and weren't coming to this ordination? And I was like, okay, so we have these relationships even with the lay staff there. We're close like that. We've built those bonds, and so the seminary is a joyful place. I'm happy to go back, and so we have to change the culture of priestly formation to be intentional about building fraternity, to let us see the importance of fraternity in the life of the priest, so that when the guy is getting ordained, he's already conditioned for this kind of existence. Another thing that we had to combat a little bit, some of the guys, especially guys whose dioceses are more rural, they kind of came in with this attitude. One of them said it right to us. He said, well, in my diocese, part of discerning a vocation is you are being groomed to be alone the rest of your life. You're going to be in a rural parish alone, and so you got to do it yourself. And again, I thought, that doesn't make any sense. Our theology does not support that kind of understanding of the priesthood. And so it's okay, yes, you might be in a rural rectory far, far away. Well, what does fraternity look like for you? And we saw in our internship, when we're many kilometers away in our respective dioceses, that you can continue to foster and build on fraternity even when you're far away by virtue of technology. And if you care and build those relationships, you can make intentional opportunities to come together at different junctures. And so you can still be a fraternal support to one another, even in those contexts. If we can change the attitude and the formation of seminarians to see this fraternal bond as essential and to cultivate the tools to live it out well, then we wouldn't have to try so hard to change the culture of our presbyterates. We would be just infiltrating the presbyterate with this kind of spirit of fraternity. And so we need to, as priests already, when guys are coming in, help them enter into that fraternity. We need to model for them fraternity and invite them into that. And so we have to change the culture of our presbyterates. And like we saw in my own example for my diocese, you can wait for the diocesan plan to come out, but it really depends on guys who take the lead, even when there's a plan. And so we need to take the lead.
Like we did.
Like we're trying to do. And the last thing I'll say is we've talked a lot about seminarians and priests, presbyterates. I just want to acknowledge as well the bishops. It's not easy to be a bishop. It's hard to be a priest. There's a lot of struggles in the parish, but I'm convinced there's a lot more struggles in your office than in my office, Your Excellency. And so I think our bishops need to have a few more episcopals. It's my bishop joke. I really mean that. Like, I don't know what that looks like for the bishop to have fraternity amongst bishops, especially when you're in your own diocese. In my diocese in Halifax, we're very blessed because we have our Archbishop, Bishop Brian Dunn, but we have two retired bishops, Archbishop Mancini and Archbishop Martin Curry. And I think the three of them have a little bit of a bond as well. And actually, at the suggestion of my former pastor, Father Tachuku, last year leading up to Christmas, we actually invited the three of them over for dinner to our rectory. There was no liturgy, there was no parish event. We just said, why don't you three come over, we're gonna have a dinner together and hang out. And it was beautiful for me to just watch these three guys. Like, in many ways, I felt like we were just ministering to them in that moment. Like, they were mostly talking amongst themselves, but they were just relaxed, having a nice drink, having a nice meal together, and not talking business, which was really lovely. And so I think we need to support our bishops, and I think our bishops too need to cultivate fraternity as well to support you in your ministry, because you're human like the rest of us, you're baptized like the rest of us, you're part of the mystical body of Christ, and so we all need to care and support one another.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump back to just a quick word on fraternity and priestly formation, because I think I skipped this over in the first talk, but one of the priests at the seminary, Father Seamus Hogan, he had a famous line. He said, "As goes the seminarian, so goes the priest." Now in seminary, I hated getting up for 6:30 in the morning for adoration and then morning prayer, and I suffered through it my entire formation. Didn't do a whole lot to work on that. And sure enough, now that I'm a priest, I hate getting up at 6:30 in the morning for whatever I have to do. But I do it because, it's fear of eternal damnation now too. But there's also, that's what we do. We suffer ourselves for others as well. But as goes the seminarian, so goes the priest. And so if we are able to instill these fraternity ideals and ideas into them in in seminary, then hopefully they will carry that through to be a priest. And as kind of a conclusion, I would just like to say that, now two people, especially you, those from foreign dioceses, know two people from the East Coast. So if you're ever in Prince Edward Island, Father Jim and I'm going to speak for Father Jim because I know our doors are open if you ever want to come down for a visit. If you don't know where I'm at, I can't speak for Jim in this case, but for me, as soon as you get off the bridge, if you don't know where I'm at, just ask the next person. Doesn't matter whether they're Catholic or Protestant. Everybody knows who Father Walter is in Prince Edward Island. So I'm quite easy to find. So yeah, come visit the island, come visit the East Coast, Halifax, and take advantage of the friendships and fraternities, that we are creating in even in just coming to these conferences. And now you have a contact in other dioceses as well for when you need or want to get away. So.
Yeah, throughout our seminary, we used to tell guys at the seminary, yes, you come down anytime, visit the East Coast. They'd almost laugh at us as if that's so far away, I will never visit you kind of thing. And now we're ordained, we're here, and we get visitors on a regular basis. We call it the East Coast Tour, because most people visit me and then him, or him and then me. And just in the last couple months, we've hosted 5 different people have come to visit. And I'm not gonna lie, it's exhausting. They're coming and I tell them, I'm not on vacation when you come, I'm doing ministry. But we make some time to have a meal, hang out, they get to do a little sightseeing, and it's really quite beautiful that we have those relationships and people are open to coming. And some of the ones who've come are not like our best friends either, I'd say. Like they're not the people you'd assume would be on that list who come. Yes, yeah, there's some people who are like, oh wow, like that, and that's awesome that we've, I guess, cultivated that. So that's great, so I encourage you to do that as well, and you're welcome to visit us anytime in Halifax or PEI. So we have some time left, and I'll just say everything that we've talked about, we are going to make available to you in a handout. It's will get emailed out. Father Peter will email them to you. We're also going to make available the post-synodal exhortation on fraternity that was held at St. Augustine's. It's actually, like, it sounds a little tongue-in-cheek. It was actually very beautiful and really a work of the Holy Spirit. So we'll make that available as well by email. So we have about 19 minutes left, and we just want to open it up to the group to talk about your own experiences, maybe what stood out for you from this talk, what might be helpful in your presbyterates, how can we support fraternity building amongst us, and when we all go back to our councils of priests to talk about this week that we spent together, like what can we take from the sharing today that could maybe positively impact our local dioceses. So we'll conclude and just open up to facilitate some group discussion now.
I'm just going to say that the Archbishop of Bonanza, when he was talking to the priests in Ottawa, he said, when priests are together, it's not a waste of time. Because he was very clear on that. That was his point, and I never forgot that. We're lucky I'm part of a situation where I was part of one diocese, and then all of a sudden we got stuck with another diocese in Ottawa. But we had, for the longest time, a young clergy, or actually we call ourselves the Amigos, and now we have a younger group of priests coming in, and now they are called the Amigos too. And that way they have that they're trying to do the same thing that we've done. We've been doing this for at least 10 years, over 10 years, and but it's not all the priests are involved with this. Was young clergy. And then the other thing is that I've always go every Saturday. Well, now I have 2 other priests because of the associate, but I always visiting one priest since almost 20 years, same every Saturday, and it's important.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Father Peter?
One of the things that you said, I think it was either at the beginning of this talk or maybe in the prior talk, but was about how a lot of the fraternity that you experience is actually with priests from outside of your own diocese. And I'd say that's actually something that I very much experienced as well. That's some of my closest priest friends outside my diocese. And I've noticed that one of the difficulties with sometimes fraternity within the diocese is that there's a tension that exists because you're also working in collaboration with those priests. And that, I know this is a fault of mine, but I know sometimes that there can be a frustration there, that because there's a certain number of things that need to get done. And that if your brother isn't doing them, then that's a good chance that maybe you're going to have to do them. And so maybe just speak to like that tension that can exist of wanting to have a real fraternity and care and love for your brother, but also like, hey, like let's lace up some bootstraps here, and we gotta get some work done together.
Well, and it's great because there's different kinds of fraternity. Like the fraternity you have with your like a pastor associate relationship looks one way. With your brother priest in your diocese looks another way. With your brother priest in other dioceses. And it's interesting, when I first was going to seminary, most of you can appreciate here there is a sentiment of nobody in Canada likes Toronto. That's just, I love Toronto, by the way. I think they're great. People are great, and I love the city. But there was definitely a sentiment, even in my presbyterate, in some of the staff of the diocese, that to send me to Toronto was almost a bad thing, because Toronto is just so different from Halifax. True, there's maybe a lot of different pastoral dynamics and just dynamics of numbers of people and what happens in these big cities and that sort of thing. But it's not just Patrick and Toronto, it's Patrick and Toronto and Peterborough and Pembroke and St. Catharines and all these other dioceses that are actually a lot closer to Halifax than Toronto is. And so it's interesting because some of my brothers in other dioceses who became friends with me at the seminary and brothers with me, you know, they're going through very similar things in their dioceses that we're going through in Halifax. And so it becomes an opportunity just to share with each other our own experience with that, but also to look around and say, well, what are they doing? Like, what are they trying in their diocese? Like, there must be a bit of a pearl elsewhere too that we can grab onto. And so it's been really beneficial, especially with fewer vocations, to be together with guys from other dioceses, because in many ways they become an important fraternity group that supports us, especially in the early years of our ministry. Jim, were you going to say something?
We have a new bishop, as was mentioned, and although we haven't met much with him because he traveled to Poland after he was installed, but one thing I do notice in everything that he has said, he has talked about fraternity, and I noticed he's doing things to foster that. One unique thing that no other bishop has done that he has started is, well, first I noticed he hired a cook where he's living, and he's living at the Basilica. And now he's begun to invite small groups of priests for dinner. And he seems to know what the groupings of guys are already, because when he invited myself, he invited fellows who I do fraternize with. So he's getting his info from somewhere. So I think it builds the fraternities we already have and produces somewhat because he will cover everybody. He's not showing favoritism. It even builds on another level, I suppose, a fraternity even with the bishop. And so I'm hoping that will continue, and I know not every bishop would feel comfortable doing that, and some dioceses are huge. I mean, we're small and we know each other, so, but some of the smaller dioceses, that could be fostered.
That's beautiful, and I think ties nicely with Monsignor Valerie's talk the other night on being a bishop and with his priests. And just last week, the end of the week, I was chatting with my own bishop. He had come home from the plenary of the CCCB, and he had received a presentation on the need to support young priests in their early years of ministry. And he was saying, I guess we should get together because they're telling me I got to be more attentive to the young guys. I said, that's awesome, I'd love that. And I said, you know something, when I was in seminary, they were telling us that we have to be attentive to you as well, and we have to foster our relationship with our bishop. So that's I think a great example where we're seeing right now on both sides, both the bishops and the seminarians, being asked to cultivate that bond between them and their bishop, which again, I've seen priests who the idea of being anywhere near the bishop is a bad thing. And again, I think if that's our model of presbyterate, then I think that's only going to challenge us in our ministry and in our vocation.
So see, I come from a diocese on the better side of Lake Ontario, but and a diocese that has always had a good fraternity among the priests. And over the last 10 years or so, we've had a big influx of priests from other countries who are new to Canada, new immigrants. And I have to say, our retreat back in August, we had 50 of the priests on retreat in Niagara Falls. And it was just beautiful to see how guys didn't sit in cliques. You know, at each of the meals, guys moved around different tables. And also the foreign priests or the new priests in Canada really just reminded us again of the importance of our fraternity. And so it was a very, very pleasant experience.
That's awesome, and I think that's the reality of more and more dioceses having new priests coming from away, and that's another one of these divides that can easily be put up between the locals and the come from away people, the incarnated and the the diocesan and the religious. Again, obstacles, the traditional, the not so traditional, like all these things can become very much dividers in the diocese, and how we find ways to overcome. You're not gonna get rid of those things, but how do we overcome those things to build the fraternity?
In our diocese, we're blessed with religious, and as a priest, I have always observed community dynamics. And I think in the seminary they tried to push it with us. But I love whether I'm the Carmelites or the Holy Cross or whatever. And I can see that most times they actually can't stand each other, but they're committed to having coffee, and they chirp each other, and they're back the next day. And I just think, I love this, because they can be different. They can be, politically, within the church, liturgically, sports. Like the chirping actually unifies. And I think to myself, as I'm trying to build it as a diocesan guy, I just love to see how actually most of my best friends are religious. And I love them for the fact of their inclusion in me right away. Whereas with a lot of diocesan guys, I felt I had to earn their trust, which is a whole other topic. But how with the religious, I just love seeing how it's so different, but they're committed. We are Holy Cross, we are Carmelite, we are Precious Blood. And I just think that, we have a lot to learn from religious communities. And, the life in the seminaries, let's just get through this. So I get ordained, and we serve in the same diocese, but you're in that deanery, or, this is my castle, stay out of my castle, just, visit your hospital calls and blah, blah. But when you see the diocesan guys more like what I would say the religious, to model real community, or you're calling it fraternity, is very inspiring. And it motivates me to do a lot of the stuff that you guys are talking about, and I know I can do better. I have a religious, retired guy in our he's our most senior priest, and nobody likes hanging out with him. And I invite him over weekly on purpose, and it's the same stories, and he's negative Nancy and all of it. But I love him so much because he's negative. And I just think, I'm determined tonight he's going to say something positive. And then when he does, I'm like, I don't want to say the name because this is being recorded, but I'm just like, yes! And then I purposely invite other priests who I know can't stand him. I'm like, yeah, come to the rectory because they love me. And then they're like, oh, so-and-so's here. I'm like, yeah, he's over every Wednesday. It's fantastic. Do you hang out with this guy? Yeah. What are you talking about? I know, it's a bit of a struggle. But when we do it, it's so fun. And you're just breaking them down like you were breaking down the guy from the Perpetuity or whatever you guys call it. Anyway, I just wanted to share how religious priests have inspired me to do that even more than diocesan guys. And I say that in a room of diocesan guys, but I mean that.
Yeah, thank you, Rico. That comment and the last comment too kind of show us how even in our diocese the dynamics are changing all the time, right? We have priests coming in from other dioceses to help us out, and we have religious priests coming in. We have people moving to retirement, the odd guy becoming a bishop or whatever. Like there's always that changing dynamic. But the nice thing about the influx of new people is it's new blood, like it's new ideas, it's new ways to approach things. And, we're often, as people, but also as priests, we're afraid of change. We're afraid of putting ourselves out there and trying something new and all of this things. Patrick and I could have easily sat around and let the tension and everything go on around us, but we wanted the change. And so, we need to take some of these new ideas and these new peoples and these new ways of doing things and adapt them to help us in our own situations too.
And I think in many ways it kind of harkens back to our third theology experience where our group had changed, and one of the things that's Walter comments on in his doc is post-synodal exhortation is in the seminary, every year, like half the seminary changes because guys get ordained, guys go on internship, guys from internship come home, or back to the seminary, and new guys come in. And so you're always wrestling with this changing dynamic of the whole house as well. And so as a presbyterate, we have to challenge that ongoing changing dynamic of the presbyterate. Yeah, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, you might
Sure.
turn around here, sorry. You people from the Maritimes and Ontario talk already, so I think I have to, from the West, I have to say something. I'm Father Thomas Nguyen from Regina. Yes, I believe Regina Diocese or Saskatoon or Prince Albert, it seemed to me almost the same. When I look at our own dioceses, look like the gardens, all the different flowers now. We have different ethnic backgrounds. You know, over half of my priests from our diocese is from other countries. Back to, I was ordained 30 years actually. Back to 30 years ago, we have different groups, as we call support groups in our diocese. And each group we have between 5 to 10 priests. And I enjoy at that time. And at that time, when I was ordained, only 2 Oriental priests, only me and one Father Hector, he just passed away from Philippines. And I enjoyed to work with them, to be with Canadians, I would say, backgrounds, and we went to cottages, and we went to the bar. We went, together, and we gather once a month. And since back to about 15, 20 years from now, I see different priests from other countries, like East India, Philippines, Poland, Ghana, whatever you name. And I see another sceneries you can see different, and then our support groups separated. And now when we gather, priests gathering like this, at lunch or at a break, you hear different languages. When I was back to 20, 30 years ago, I felt guilty when I talked Vietnamese with the Vietnamese, another Vietnamese priest. I always, talk in English in public. But now, Filipinos, East Indians, Africans, different groups. For me, I felt good. I felt that's good. Like I said, different flowers, in the garden. You can see that's a fraternity right there. And I see, that's my comment in my diocese right now, and I see, even now, we don't have many support groups. I'm in the group of organized groups, and now we have only 2 original groups still working. And most groups we have now is different ethnic groups, they gather together. So that's my comment in my own diocese, so I hope you understand now the situation.
Thanks so much. So we're going to wrap up. We could probably talk and share for a long time, but in interest of our time together. So I think that the takeaway, if we're going to boil it down to what's the takeaway from all this, I go back to the title of our first talk. Am I my brother's keeper? And in many ways, yes, that is the answer. I am my brother's keeper, and my brother is also my keeper. That fraternity is that kind of two-way street. We need it, and we need to foster it. And so we have to strive to find ways to foster fraternity amongst us, to cultivate a spirit of fraternity, to support each of us in our ministry and in our vocation. Sorry, you finish that. I'm done. I want you to finish it.
As we all know, whenever we are facing change or the need for change in fraternity or whatever it is in life, I'd say every time that change starts with you. So if you want to make the change, if you want the change to happen, like Patrick and I in second theology, you got to do it. Don't do it alone. You might have to start out alone, but get others to help you. But as with any change, sometimes you are the one that's going to have to make the change. So don't be afraid to step up and take the lead on it. Although, you know, we have worked a lot on this in the last couple of years and continue to work on it now. We ask for your prayers and we are certainly praying for you as we work through this fraternity problem and find the solutions for ourselves and for all of our brother priests. So, thank you so much. You know, Charlottetown, or well, actually Alberton, Stratford, Halifax, if Dartmouth, if you're interested, you know, Google Maps is a good help, but we will see you soon.
Brothers, on behalf of the Federation, it's with great joy that I have the ability to thank the both of you from coming from your places of ministry to be with us, to help us as we continue to build fraternity as a fraternity of priests here at the CFPC, but also back in our own dioceses. May the Lord continue to bless you for the things you're doing. Thanks for your commitment to seek out the lost, because sometimes we don't even realize when we ourselves are lost, and others may be reaching out to us. So we certainly don't feel lost with your message about accountability and vulnerability. So thanks for being vulnerable with us, and this is just a small token of our appreciation. May the Lord continue to bless you both with many more years of fruitful ministry and continue to reach out to those who are lost. God bless you both.